What's going on, y'all? KM Best here. This is my guide to all the cards that are coming out in the June Eternals season. And we will start with the season pass card, Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is a 5/7 that gets +1 for each other card on your side of the board with increased power. Now, this is very literally taken in game. Increased power just means the power of the card is green. So, for example, if it is getting a power increase, but also getting a similar power decrease, let's say you played a bishop that had been scorpioned and you played one card after the bishop, thereby bringing it back up to 1 power. Gilgamesh will not actually see that as an increase. This is a bit of a departure from cards that are worded in similar ways, such as High Evolutionary Abomination, which looks for afflicted power. So that, rather than looking for red power, we'll just look for whether or not there is a negative marker on the card. Whereas Gilgamesh, the card needs to actually have its power actually increased. So if you put a bishop in a Necrotia, but you don't play enough cards to make the bishop big enough to get back to above where it was, to get to that green power, Gilgamesh will not trigger off of that bishop. Now, as far as how this card is actually playing out right now, because it actually already is out, I'm about 2 days late with this video, but I hope people still watch it regardless because there's plenty to go over. Gilgamesh is a card that goes very well with one specific card, and that is Blue Marvel. Gilgamesh Blue Marvel is sort of the peanut butter and jelly of how this goes. As far as my recommendations for Gilgamesh, I actually played only Gilgamesh decks to climb to infinite, and I was surprised by how strong he felt because I looked at this card and my initial assessment was that he was underwhelming, and I still think he is likely to end up relatively underwhelming. This is a card that strikes me as a 3.5 out of 5. It's a pretty good card. It's not a great card, but it is going to be pretty good, and there are chances that it ends up legitimately relevant in a world where, the metagame ends up getting a little depowered. Right now, I just don't think it matches up to the power of Professor X Cannonball, and I think that is unfortunate because those are the sort of comparable slots that you'd be talking about. Many decks that are running Gilgamesh could be running Prof X Cannonball, so you have Gilgamesh Blue Marvel swapping out for that, and it might just actually make your deck better. That puts Gilgamesh in an awkward situation. One of the things that happens a lot in Marvel Snap is a good card will come out, a good 5-cost card specifically, and it will end up feeling, oh, I guess there's just probably something better to do here. Because there's just an astonishing amount of good 1-2 punch 5-cost card combinations. It's hard for a 5-cost card to stand out. Where Gilgamesh does stand out is as a season pass card. So first of all, if you are going to spend any real money in the game, buying the season pass is always the best way to do it. Second of all, if you are going to get a card and you are early in the game. So for example, if you are pool 1, if you are pool 2, you will benefit a lot from Gilgamesh. This is a card that really upgrades a deck that you already have, Zoo, to a real level. You can probably take pool 2 Zoo and Gilgamesh and do something real. I'm not saying you're going to be favored into a bunch of people playing all the best decks in the world, but you will be able to compete, and that is not nothing. I felt like I was able to compete and win on a very real level with a Khazar Zoo deck that had this card in it. And granted, I had some good cards in there too. I had Nico Minoru and stuff, but I'm not sure if that stuff's all that necessary. It does feel like this is a card that will very easily bridge Pool 2 Zoo into being something closer to a competitive actual deck. Is it going to show up on a lot of my tier lists? Probably not. But if you're looking for a budget deck and you're at the beginning of the game, I think Gilgamesh is actually a great pickup. So my overall understanding of this card is that it is about a 3.5 out of 5 if you have a full collection, probably about a 4.5 out of 5 if you are a newer player. Next up is Thena, also already out, a 2/1 that gets +3 if you play exactly 2 cards. I think it's important to talk about what Thena is and what Thena isn't. Thena is very good. She goes with Ravonna Renslayer packages. She's extremely powerful in the dominant Prof X Cannonball deck. What Thena is not is better than Angela. And I think that's something that I think a lot of people need to understand. This is not Angela 1, it's Angela 2. And on turn 2, I think it's possible she ends up better than Angela, but you, in terms of pure numbers, but you are sacrificing something for not playing multiple cards a lot of the time when you play her. Like, yes, her number goes up, but a lot of the time you are sacrificing, like, I don't know, playing a Kitty Pryde on your Angela or something along those lines, especially if you're playing her with Hope Summers. This card is a solid addition to what was already a very good deck, which makes it very difficult to just analyze its power on its own. Because Thena very clearly goes in the Ravonna, Prophex, Cannonball, Angela, Kitty Pryde, Hope Summers. You know the deck. Like, you know what deck I'm talking about here, and Thena goes in that. What's interesting for me is trying to figure out where, if anywhere, she goes elsewhere. And I think the interesting thing about this card specifically is it's such a power boost to that archetype because of how well a card like Kitty Pryde can bridge the gap between, say, an Angela and Athena, right? So, like, you have this card that is great with Angela, it's great with Thena, it's great with everything else you're doing, and it sort of makes me wonder if she's kind of pigeonholed in that archetype. She is Angela 2, but only for decks that are already playing Angela Kitty Pryde. That is what sort of sticks out to me. If you're not an Angela Kitty Pryde deck, or even if you're not an Angela Kitty Pryde deck that's like built the way those Angela Kitty Pryde decks are, such that you are trying to like generally scale up, for example. Like, I'm not sure a zoo list would get a ton out of this because often zoo is like, all right, I'm playing one card on turn 4, one card on turn 5, and then like 4 cards on turn 6, right? Like there's kind of a lot of specificity to how Thena works. So this very specific type of mid-range deck where it's built to be a Kitty plus 5 deck on 6, a Kitty plus 4 deck on 5, like she goes so well with what deck builders were already doing with Kitty Pryde, which is card plus Kitty. That works great with Thena. Obviously, that worked great with Angela. But I do think she's a little more narrow than people are giving her credit for. She fits very easily into what I would consider the best deck in the game, but I'm not sure that that actually makes her an amazing card overall, and I think it actually makes her a little bit prone to being overrated. My real question is, what happens to this card in a world where Professor X gets nerfed, or a world where Cannonball gets nerfed? Does the deck just still keep on keeping on? My instinct is that yes. Like, I think that this card, if you are someone who likes playing Angela midrange, is going to be in a ton of your decks because this card goes very well with what your deck is already trying to do. But I don't know exactly how much of her power is being buoyed by the fact that Angela midrange is currently like the best deck in the game. And so in a world where this is like the 4th best deck in the game, are you investing 6,000 tokens into buying Athena? I think that's a more interesting question. Because right now, I do think she's very good in what is the best deck in the game, but I also think that best deck is very much a nerf possibility. And I think that this is a card that you need to look inside yourself and say, am I an Angela Kitty Pryde fan? Because if I am, I would expect to be playing this card. If I am not, I would expect to not really see a lot of use for it. That is my read on Thena at the moment. Obviously, things can change. Next up is Cersei, a 5/7 who has the ability to transform cards on the board into random cards that cost 1 more. Now, a lot of people who played Hearthstone just got some serious PTSD from this, but I do think there is a very meaningful difference with how Evolve works in Marvel Snap and how Evolve works in Hearthstone. In Hearthstone, the way Evolve worked was your units can take damage, so you would value trade your units off and then evolve them, effectively getting double value out of that. There is no real capacity for Cersei to have that kind of effect. She'll be a lot more of a straightforward card in Marvel Snap because you're not going to like value trade stuff off and then evolve it. The closest we have to value trading stuff off and then evolving it is on reveals. So like an on reveal like White Tiger turning into a 6-drop, stuff like that is really interesting. And this brings me to something that I really want to point out that I have been noticing for a while now that I think is sort of going underrated in terms of like potential future balance issues. Cersei, Blink, Ravonna Renslayer, all of these cards are very good at making cards that are designed to be used for their on reveals that have sort of weak bodies on their own into very powerful cards. And so as an example, let's take a look at something like Jubilee, which is a 4/1 that draws a card from your deck, puts it on the board. At 4-1, it's very clearly balanced to not have a lot of power in itself. Blink turns Jubilee into something bigger, thereby breaking the paradigm Jubilee was designed around. And I think Cersei has a similar effect. I think Ravonna has a similar effect. Like, there's not as many ways to design an on-reveal card now, because if you design, say, a 4-2 Leech, what's going to happen is it's either going to get Cersei'd into a 5-drop and the downside is going to be mitigated that way, or it's going to get blinked into something bigger and the downside is going to be mitigated that way. And if you make it a 4-1, people are going to play it on turn 3 with Ravonna and the downside is going to be mitigated that way. And it just sort of feels like one of the things that's happening in Marvel Snap right now is you can't actually, like, all of these cards that are like dominating the metagame, there's a lot of stuff like this. Professor X chief among them, but we had the Jubilee Blink stuff, where it's like these cards are designed around having a small amount of power, and that small amount of power ends up being mitigated by something else. And Cersei is a card that's absolutely going to do that kind of stuff, right? Like, when you look at Cersei, I see not just a card that's like, you know, a pretty good into being an Annihilus Sentry card, but a card that has Mockingbird synergy, a card that turns your Mysterios into 3-drops, the clones that are 0 power into 3-drops. Like, there's a lot of small stuff this card does that strikes me as extremely powerful. So when I look at this card, what I see is, first and foremost, a Mockingbird, Mysterio, Annihilus Sentry card. That's what I see when I look at this card. This is a card that is turning the Void into a bigger thing, and that's actually just a crazy thing to do, because you have this, like, will they, won't they, right? You are forcing someone, when you play a Sentry, you're saying, fill up that lane that the Void is on, or I'm going to send it over there. And so then they, like, overinvest in filling up that lane, and you play a Cersei there, and you have 2 5-drops there, and you might just win that lane on points, because they were, like, panicking, and they felt like they had to fill it up, because otherwise they get Annihilist, and now that lane is full, and you're just going to win it. Awful, awful, awful stuff there. But also, it's like, okay, I have some cards in a Mysterio. I Cersei the Mysterio lane. That means that my Mysterio clone turns into a 3-drop. Another card there turns into a card that didn't start in my deck. Suddenly, my Mockingbird costs 1. And there's just a lot of stuff like that, where it's like, there's a lot of small pieces that sort of all come together with this card that make me very excited for her. This is a card that I expect to go in, like, some sort of just mid-range slush kind of deck, right? Like, the kind of decks you see a lot on my channel. It's just like, this feels like a very interesting thing to be doing, because there's so much overlap with Mockingbird. There's overlap with Mysterio, which is already good because you have Mockingbird and Sasquatch. And while it is reasonable to say, you know, random 3s aren't that good, random 4s aren't that good, random 5s aren't that good, random 6s especially are not that good, turning something that was nothing into something that is not nothing is a strong thing to do. Cersei is a card that I expect to be in and out of mid-range decks for her entire lifespan. Like, I expect this card to be a good, solid, mid-range staple type card, up to and including, like, the risk there is, of course, she doesn't go in the Profex Cannonball Angela deck. She just doesn't, right? Like, she doesn't go there. It's hard to get her into that. There's better 5-drops to be playing. So I worry that she might hit a little low, but I also think that, like, her synergies are going to be very clear from first glance. So, like, when you play this card, you're going to want to be playing Mysterio, you're going to want to be playing Sentry Annihilus, you're going to want to be playing Mockingbird. She's just a card that makes a good deck better. And I think that it's going to be very hard for that deck to be legitimately bad. It's just a very solid thing to be doing. Makkari, a 3/3 that effectively plays itself for free. So this is effectively a 0/3. And I think this card could have been something that really mattered, but right now I'm not sure it will. And I'll sort of detail why. I think that Makkari is a card that is incredibly impactful in a world where mid-range decks are jockeying for positioning and looking for small edges, and 3 power really matters in that world. I just don't think we live in that world. We live in a post-Loki society, and Loki has made those mid-range decks kind of a thing of the past. Loki has made it so, like, games that are decided by, like, 3 points in mid-range mirrors, it's just kind of not a thing anymore. we have things that are much, much larger now. For example, we're talking about getting 3 power for free. Okay, well, I'm playing Red Hulk. I just got 4 power for free because you skipped a turn because you had Makkari coming out there and you couldn't fill up your curve. You got 3 power for free. I got 4 power for free. I don't care. And so when I look at this card, I look at it and I see a card that is made for a bygone era. This could have been like kind of an impactful card when people were playing like Iron Lad Black Bolt Stature in like last March or May or whenever that was. It could have mattered. But I just don't think that it will right now. And I understand the value of free stuff. I really do. It's just like there's so many cards that are effectively giving you free stuff for more, right? And I think one thing that people need to understand is free stuff is broken, but so is overstated stuff, right? And there's sort of a relative value thing going on here where it's like, if you get 12 power for free, but it fills up your entire board, that's cool, but you can still lose to someone who's playing a 6-17 on that lane, right? There's diminishing returns on getting stuff for free because you are limited in the amount of board slots you have. And so I think there is something to the idea that this card could have been good, but probably won't be. I don't have high hopes for this card. When I look at it, I'm like, it could be good in Cerebro 3. Like, that could actually be real. But it's also Cerebro 3. So, like, what are we really talking about here? And also, Cerebro 3 is a deck that, like, often wants this kind of stuff. So maybe it's just totally fine. This is just a good Cerebro 3 card. But again, we're talking about Cerebro 3, which, if it ever becomes a dominant deck, becomes kind of remarkably easy to tech around. It's like a deck that's only good by virtue of the fact that no one really puts effort into beating it. And so if you have this situation where, like, I don't think this will happen, Makkari pushes Cerebro 3 over the edge, suddenly you just end up in the spot where it's like, I don't even really think this is good. And I don't know exactly what it would take for it to be good. I mean, I guess I do. I think if this was a 3-5, suddenly you'd be playing it a lot of places. A free 5 is really good. And so, like, I don't even know if it'd be that good at a 4. Like, I don't know how much of the needle that would move, but a free 5 would move the needle for me for sure. At 3-3, it's a Cerebro 3 card. It's a maybe Silver Surfer card, but Silver Surfer runs into that diminishing returns issue with it being a Brood deck too, such that you're not really all that inclined to play a card that might randomly clog you depending on what's going on here. I think that this card is underpowered, and I worry that it will not end up being a very exciting week for me. Phastos. So first things first, I think it is absolutely criminal that they designed a character who is a speedster, and then were like, no, actually, this other guy should be named Phastos. Don't talk to me about the Greek god Hephaestus and the roots of all the Eternals' name being that. I get that. I know that. I'm making the joke anyway. If you correct or fact check my joke, I'm gonna, I don't know if I can ban people on YouTube. I'm gonna ban you, I guess. Don't fact check my joke, okay? Named Phastos, not fast. Huge mistake. Absolute punt. Whoever invented these needs to go back to comics class. I think it was like Jack Kirby. Like, that's also a joke. Don't fact check my joke. Okay, so I think this guy kind of sucks. I know there are people who are pretty high on this card, and I think he's, like, kind of okay, but it's like, the issue with him is, I don't know how he works. Like, there are two ways this card could work. Way number one is you play him, and he chooses either -1 cost or +2 power, and applies that to your deck, right? That's actually, I think, a better version of this card. That card would be good. Nah, I don't think that card would be. That card would be interesting, right? -1 cost, +2 power. The way I think he actually works, because Ben Brode made this game, is I think each card gets it randomly applied. And I think that's just really bad. I just don't know how to deck build with this guy. Whenever I'm like, I should make a Phastos deck, it's like, is that actually worth it? If I don't play this guy on 3, he's so bad. And so I'll play him on 3, and then it's like, I get, 3 free energy over the course of the game, or like 6 free power. And like, that's good, but only if I play all the cards. And I do think he goes in Surfer, because like, you have this, like, he costs 3, he's a Surfer card. But, like, unlike Makkari, he's doing something the deck actually wants, which is either allowing you to play multiple cards or giving your Broods extra power and giving your Shaws extra power. I think he makes sense there. And I think people will be like, well, you're getting minus cost. It's not actually going to be that impactful on Surfer. And the thing is, you're a Hope Summers deck when you're playing Surfer, so you are able to massage that in some way. So, like, I do think he has a home. I think he will probably go in Silver Surfer. I just don't really look at this guy and see, oh yeah, that's the great card. I put it in all my decks. I don't see that. Maybe he ends up being that and I'm just off. But to me, this reads like, oh, it's a Silver Surfer card. Dope. Let's put it in my Silver Surfer deck. And basically nowhere else. That would be my expectation for this guy. I wouldn't call myself disappointed in him, but I do think that he's a card that is fundamentally being balanced by the randomness of his effect. And if he said either of those two things, he would be a better card because he'd be better and easier to deck build around. And I'm really interested to learn what actually happens. Like, because if it's either or, I feel like I can build for that. I feel like that makes sense. But if it's just randomly applying, I feel like I don't even know how to build for that. And I know that seems weird, right? But it's like, okay, if this is either or, I can put him in Zoo, right? And be like, oh, I'm either getting a bunch of free guys or a bunch of like really big one drops. That makes sense to me. But if it's random, it just feels like I won't have enough knowledge of the card I'm going to draw. Like, I drew this one, it was -1. I drew this one, it's +2. And now I have to figure that out on the fly. And that, for some reason, makes it harder for me. I don't know. I know Lambie's pretty high on this guy, and I don't like disagreeing with him. I just don't really think I see a place for this guy outside of Silver Surfer. Also, he should have been fast. Arishem is the wackiest card they have released in ever, I think. This is a potential Thanos or Galactus level mistake because I honestly look at this card and I say, I have no idea how you tested this. And I think this is the kind of card where it's like, I don't know if you can test this because in order to test this, like what you really need on Arishem is just flat numbers. You need to know how broken it is to play an Arishem deck in the aggregate. You need like a million game sample or something. Like you need to be like, all right, over like a million games, this guy's got like a 53% win rate. And then you can be like, okay, we need to do something about this. And the fun thing about Arishem is if you need to do something about him, you can just like make him add 18 or like 24 cards, which I think is so sick. So it's like, all right, this guy's broken. Let's make him more random. We're gonna make him more random. So Arishem, there are a couple of synergies that I think are worth exploring. Synergy number 1 is Wave on turn 2, because you get an extra energy, you play Wave, you play a 6-drop on turn 3. Like, fundamentally, being an energy ahead of curve is actually kind of a broken thing to do, and Arishem is quote-unquote balanced around not actually having access to the cards you put in your deck to do that with. So, how do you make up for that? I don't really know. Like, you make up for that by doing things that are oppressively powerful with that extra energy. The most oppressively powerful thing I could think of was that. I've seen people talk about turn 4 Lady Deathstrike being oppressively powerful. Like, that's what I think you need to build for with Arishem, is do something oppressively powerful with the cards in your deck, whether that be turn 2 Wave, turn 4 Lady Deathstrike. Find something really punishing to play because that's how you're going to win games. Secondarily, you need to find a way to play games where the Arishem cards are terrible. So you have like Loki stuff, you have Agent Coulson, you might be playing Quinjet because Quinjet discounts your Arishem cards. Like there's something to be said for those. Like I think if I'm making an Arishem deck, those are like 5 cards that I'm starting with, right? The issue is you kind of are in this situation where you don't really have a lot of options to realistically respond to what your opponent is doing. So you're doing stuff that is pretty strong, but if you run into, say, Living Tribunal, you're just like, oh, I'm kind of just stats here. If you run into, like, Hela, are you going to be competitive with them on points? if you run into Profex Cannonball, are you going to be competitive with that? And I think the metagame right now is very combo focused. Even the mid-range decks have Profex Cannonball, which you could reasonably call combo. And Arishem is best. Like, I think one of the traditional things we learned from other card games is like what ramp does is be good against mid-range. And that makes sense for me. Like, this could be like a Loki type card where it's like, oh, I ran into Arishem with my like Angela deck. They're just going to do stronger stuff than me. But I don't know if that's even true. Is this card going to be good? I have no idea. And I realize you watched the video for you to figure out if this card is going to be good or not. But I'm sorry. Like, I don't know how long I would have to play with this card to have an opinion, but I haven't played with it. And so I have no opinion. And I think even a month out, I'll be like, I don't know. When I think of this card, I think of Thanos and how everyone thought he was bad for like 3 months. And then it turned out he was good. We just had to figure out how to do it. Like, this is a card that is that level of confusing to me. It's that level of I don't know anything about what this is going to do to the game. This could be the best card in the game. It could be Agatha. Like, this card could be anywhere from Thanos to Agatha. And, like, that is astonishing. That's just an astonishing sentence. And so I am very happy to have a card like this in the game that we have to all figure out over a long period of time because, good lord, like, this could be anything. This is the mystery box of cards. All right, y'all, I hope you enjoyed this review of the upcoming cards in the June Eternals season. I know it was like 2 days too late. I know Gilgamesh and Thena are already out, but I honestly think this is still going to be helpful to people. I hope you agree. I hope you got something out of that. I hope you enjoyed the KM Boost. As always, I've been KM Best. I will see you in the next one. As a reminder, Twitch drops appear to be starting on the 7th, so we will be live on Twitch. You can check me out there at KMBestMS. I've been KM Best. You've been phenomenal. I'll see you in the next one.